I never thought a simple vacation would turn into the kind of nightmare most people only read about in news headlines. It all began when I decided to take a month off to visit my family across the country, leaving my modest but carefully maintained piece of land in the quiet outskirts of town in the hands of what I thought were trustworthy neighbors. I had bought that land years ago, envisioning a peaceful retreat, a place where I could finally build my dream home, maybe even a little workshop where I could tinker with my old woodworking projects. The moment I drove away, a sense of liberation washed over me. I imagined clear skies, open roads, and the freedom to forget about property taxes, maintenance, and neighborhood politics for a while. Little did I know, while I was planning hikes and lazy afternoons by the lake, something extraordinary, and infuriating, was brewing right on my land. I started receiving odd messages a few days into my vacation, mostly vague text alerts from the local HOA, the homeowners association that had always been mildly annoying but never directly threatening. At first, I ignored them, thinking they were just reminders or minor notices about neighborhood rules, like trimming trees or keeping the lawn tidy. But the tone of the messages quickly changed, moving from routine bureaucratic requests to something more urgent, almost gleefully authoritarian, if that was even possible. Immediate construction in progress, one of the texts said cryptically. At first, I assumed they meant a new landscaping project, a small community amenity, or perhaps the installation of one of those modern, ugly neighborhood signs. I laughed it off. HOA drama was hardly newsworthy, and I was on vacation. I didn't have time to get involved in trivialities that could wait until I returned. By the time I arrived back, dragging my luggage and looking forward to the familiar solace of my land, I was greeted by a sight that made my blood run cold. Rising from the fields where I had envisioned a quiet cabin was a full-fledged hotel, 4 stories of glass and concrete, complete with neon signage that practically screamed in the midday sun. I parked at the edge of my property, unable to comprehend the scale of what had been done in my absence. The HOA had not just ignored my property rights, they had bulldozed my plans, my solitude, and my dreams, replacing them with a commercial enterprise that I had never approved. Cars lined up outside, guests milled around, and the smell of fresh paint and expensive carpeting filled the air. My mind raced. How could they possibly have built this without my consent? Who signed off on permits? Was this even legal? The initial shock soon spiraled into a combination of fury and determination. I spoke to several contractors, the local city planning office, and even the few neighbors who had witnessed the construction. Everyone seemed to acknowledge that the HOA had overstepped every conceivable boundary, yet nobody seemed willing, or able, to undo what had been done. And then, as if the universe had a sense of irony tailored just for me, my attorney uncovered an astonishing detail buried in the municipal property records. Due to a technical loophole, the land deed had automatically transferred ownership of the property, and thus the hotel, into my name. The HOA, in its arrogance, had effectively built their dream project on my land, and made me the legal owner of it. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. The very entity that had tried to exploit me had just handed me complete control over a multi-million-dollar property. As I stood there, staring at the gleaming hotel in the harsh afternoon sunlight, a strange combination of disbelief and exhilaration coursed through me. This was no longer a matter of property dispute, it was a personal vendetta waiting to be executed. I walked through the lobby, noting the opulent chandeliers, the polished marble floors, and the staff bustling about in crisp uniforms, all oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. Every detail that had been carefully orchestrated by the HOA to flaunt their power and disregard for my rights now became ammunition in a mental strategy one began to formulate. I wasn't just angry, I was empowered, armed with legal ownership and a burning desire to turn this audacious theft into an opportunity one could exploit. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the hotel in golden light, I had already started sketching plans to assert my control, reclaim my dignity, and ensure that the HOA would never forget the day they underestimated me. The next morning, I returned to the hotel, this time with a renewed sense of purpose and my attorney in tow. We began meticulously reviewing every permit, every signature, and every document associated with the construction. It turned out that in their rush to flaunt authority, the HOA had overlooked a few critical legal formalities, loopholes that, once highlighted, gave me unprecedented leverage. I felt a thrill that was equal parts satisfaction and disbelief. I had walked into what seemed like a nightmare, and yet here I was, sitting in the marble-lined lobby of their so-called triumph, planning how to turn it entirely in my favor. My mind raced with strategies, each more daring than the last. Perhaps I could renovate, rebrand, or even lease the property to a high-end operator while keeping ultimate control. The possibilities were intoxicating. I quickly realized that the hotel wasn't just a structure, it was a small ecosystem of employees, vendors, and guests, all operating under the illusion that the HOA had the authority to run it. That illusion shattered the moment I introduced myself as the owner. The hotel manager's jaw dropped as I handed over copies of the legal deed proving my ownership. He stammered, barely able to form sentences as he realized that the rules had changed overnight. Employees who had once followed the HOA's directives without question now looked to me for instructions. It was surreal, almost cinematic, to watch the power dynamics shift so abruptly. The once untouchable HOA now seemed like a distant memory, their arrogance immobilized by the simple fact that I held the ultimate authority. By midday, I had established my control over the operational side of the hotel. I held meetings with department heads, clarified my expectations, and began implementing immediate changes to improve efficiency and guest experience. Meanwhile, I carefully documented every interaction, every misstep the HOA had made, knowing that this evidence could be used in any future disputes or to publicly assert my dominance over the situation. I even allowed myself a small, private grin when I imagined the faces of the HOA board members as they realized that their attempt to capitalize on my absence had completely backfired. Each corner of the hotel, from the sunlit breakfast area to the dimly lit spa, became a symbol of my vindication. In the midst of all this, I also had to deal with the tricky matter of finances. The HOA had already set up vendor contracts, staffing schedules, and pricing structures, and while most were reasonable, some were laughably poor decisions. I quickly renegotiated agreements with local suppliers, adjusted staffing to optimize efficiency, and even started planning a marketing campaign to draw in a higher caliber of clientele. The thrill of taking what was built as a slight against me and transforming it into an asset was intoxicating. I had essentially inherited a fully functional hotel, and with careful management, it had the potential to become a goldmine. I could practically see my bank account swelling as I walked through the polished hallways, imagining a future where the HOA's arrogance funded my success rather than undermining it. By the end of the second day, the hotel was under my full operational control, and word had begun to spread throughout the local community about the unusual shift in ownership. Neighbors who had previously snickered at the HOA's grandstanding now approached me with curiosity and admiration. Some offered advice, others simply watched in awe as I made decisive changes that clearly marked me as the true authority. I couldn't help but savor the irony. A property that had been thrust upon me through the HOA's audacity was now my platform for power, wealth, and a kind of personal justice that few could ever imagine. By sunset, as I gazed out over the parking lot filled with cars and guests, I felt an exhilarating sense of triumph. It wasn't just about reclaiming my land anymore, it was about rewriting the rules entirely, and ensuring that the HOA would never underestimate me again. With operational control firmly in my hands, I knew the next step was to confront the HOA, the very people who had thought they could exploit me with impunity. I scheduled a formal meeting at their offices, making sure it was public enough that a few neighbors and even some local reporters would take notice. I arrived in a sleek, black SUV, my presence impossible to ignore, and walked into the boardroom with a calm that belied the fury simmering beneath the surface. The HOA members looked at me with a mix of surprise, discomfort, and what I could only describe as disbelief. These were the same people who had arrogantly assumed they could build a commercial property on my land without consequence. Now, every ounce of their condescension had to be swallowed as I laid out my case, complete with documents, photographs, and the exact legal references that made me the rightful owner of the hotel. As I spoke, I noticed the subtle shifts in their posture, the tightened shoulders, the nervous glances, the whispered consultations with each other. They realized, almost too late, that their power had evaporated the moment I claimed what was legally mine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet authority in my tone carried far more weight than any shouting ever could. I described the entire timeline of events, highlighting their audacity and the sheer incompetence that had allowed me to claim ownership. By the time I finished, the room was silent except for the sound of papers shuffling and a few guilty coughs. It was exhilarating, watching them squirm under the weight of their own mistakes, knowing that each of their prior threats, notices, and petty intimidations had backfired spectacularly. The meeting soon turned into a tense negotiation. I wasn't looking for revenge in the petty sense. I wanted recognition, respect, and a clear acknowledgement that the hotel was mine to manage, profit from, and protect as I saw fit. The HOA tried their usual tricks, suggesting shared ownership, compromises, and even hints at lawsuits that would drag this out. I smiled, calm and unshaken, because I knew something they didn't. The law, in this case, was entirely on my side. Every claim they made could be countered with documentation, every threat nullified by legal precedent. By the time the meeting ended, they were visibly defeated, muttering under their breath, clearly aware that their hubris had led them straight into a corner with no way out. I left the building knowing I had not just defended my property, I had humiliated the people who had tried to overstep their authority. Returning to the hotel, I couldn't resist a small tour of the property to reinforce my sense of ownership. I walked through the bustling lobby, smiled at the staff who now looked at me as the ultimate authority, and peeked into the empty suites, imagining the kind of clientele I wanted to attract. Every detail, the polished floors, the sparkling chandeliers, even the signage the HOA had thought would mock me, was now a tool in my arsenal. I made notes for upgrades, tweaks in service, and subtle branding changes that would signal the hotel's new direction without overtly flaunting my victory over the HOA. In my mind, every corner, every fixture, and every employee was now aligned with my vision, and the realization that I had turned a potential disaster into a personal empire filled me with a thrill unlike anything I had ever experienced. By the end of the day, I began to plan long-term strategies, partnerships with local businesses, exclusive events to draw affluent guests, and marketing campaigns to establish the hotel as the town's premier destination. Meanwhile, I considered a few gentle reminders for the HOA, small, pointed messages that made it clear I was not someone to cross. It was one thing to claim ownership legally, it was another to assert dominance psychologically, and I intended to do both. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the hotel parking lot, I realized that what had started as a vacation nightmare had transformed into the ultimate power play, a stolen property turned into an asset that could shape my wealth, influence, and standing in the community for years to come. For the first time in months, I felt not just relief but a thrilling, intoxicating sense of control that was mine, entirely, and entirely deserved. With the HOA effectively neutralized and the hotel securely under my control, I shifted my focus to expansion and profitability. I wanted to ensure that this wasn't just a short-term victory, it had to be a legacy of triumph over arrogance. I began by transforming the hotel's marketing approach, emphasizing luxury, exclusivity, and unique experiences that no competitor in town could match. Local influencers were invited to preview the suites, photographers captured the sparkling ambience in the bright morning light, and social media buzz began to generate inquiries faster than the staff could handle. Each strategic move felt like a chess piece falling perfectly into place. I watched with quiet satisfaction as the occupancy rates began to soar, realizing that the very property the HOA had used as a symbol of their supposed dominance was now my ticket to influence, recognition, and substantial wealth. As profits rose, so did my confidence. I started networking with city officials, local business owners, and even some of the regional hotel chains, subtly establishing myself as a serious player in the hospitality industry. Invitations to community events, conferences, and board meetings started landing in my inbox, and I attended each one with a calm authority, always aware that my story, the audacious hotel built without my consent but now entirely mine, added a kind of mystique that no amount of networking could manufacture. The HOA, once the center of my frustrations, had become an unintentional marketing tool. Their attempt to seize control had inadvertently highlighted my resilience and savvy, making me the talk of the town in ways that surpassed any conventional PR strategy. Meanwhile, I implemented operational improvements within the hotel. I hired seasoned managers, introduced advanced booking systems, and upgraded the amenities to create a world-class guest experience. I even organized a series of local partnerships, hosting events and festivals that brought in visitors from surrounding towns, all while positioning the hotel as a hub for cultural, business, and recreational activity. Guests praised the property online, and 5-star reviews multiplied overnight. Every dollar earned and every positive comment felt like a personal victory against the HOA, a tangible reminder that what they had attempted to steal had instead become a symbol of my ingenuity and determination. Walking through the bustling lobby, observing the seamless flow of activity, I felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about transforming audacity into achievement. Yet, even amidst all this success, I never lost sight of the HOA. I carefully monitored their meetings, subtly influencing decisions through my newfound authority and, on occasion, sending gentle, ironic reminders that I now held the ultimate power. Neighbors whispered about the reversal of fortune, and the board members themselves began to avoid any confrontations with me, knowing their previous attempts at manipulation had failed spectacularly. I had turned the tables completely. The property that was built in my absence now operated under my command, generating wealth, respect, and a quiet, almost poetic justice. It was a masterclass in strategy, patience, and opportunism, the kind of story that would later be told at social gatherings as a cautionary tale of arrogance meeting its match. By the end of the month, the hotel had fully integrated into the community, and my reputation as its rightful, capable owner was firmly established. I began to plan for the future, considering expansions, potential acquisitions, and even philanthropic projects that would cement my influence. Every decision was deliberate, each choice calculated, and every success served as proof that sometimes the boldest moves, the ones born from adversity, yield the most extraordinary rewards. I had arrived at a point where the initial anger and shock had been replaced by a confident, strategic vision. The hotel was mine, the HOA was neutralized, and my future was brighter, more profitable, and infinitely more satisfying than I could have ever imagined when I first discovered what had been done on my land. With everything firmly in place, I finally allowed myself to savor the full magnitude of what had been accomplished. The hotel, once a symbol of the HOA's audacity, had become a monument to my resilience, foresight, and strategic mind. I walked through the grand lobby in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, observing guests checking in with smiles, staff moving efficiently, and the polished floors reflecting the bright light like a mirror of my success. Every detail, from the carefully curated artwork to the scent of fresh linens, was now under my control, tailored to reflect the vision I had fought so hard to claim. The realization that I had not only reclaimed my property but transformed it into a thriving empire filled me with a sense of power and vindication that went far beyond money. It was a triumph of intellect, patience, and persistence over arrogance and entitlement. I began hosting meetings in the hotel's elegant conference rooms, inviting city officials, investors, and local business leaders to witness firsthand the property that had once been a battlefield. Each conversation, each handshake, and each deal solidified my status as the true authority, and word spread quickly about the extraordinary story behind the hotel. The HOA's members, who had once flaunted their control and dismissed my rights, were now relegated to the role of spectators, watching as their overreach became the foundation of my newfound influence. I even instituted subtle, strategic reminders for them, gentle but unmistakable actions that ensured they never forgot the day they underestimated me, from official correspondence to minor operational adjustments that highlighted my ownership. It was revenge, yes, but executed with the precision and elegance of someone who understood that true power was demonstrated through control, not chaos. As the months passed, the hotel flourished beyond my expectations. Occupancy rates soared, revenue exceeded projections, and the property became a cornerstone of the community, hosting events, weddings, and conferences that drew guests from across the region. Every success was a testament to the audacity of claiming what was legally mine, the careful planning I had invested, and the shrewd management that turned a stolen opportunity into a personal and financial triumph. The HOA's attempts to reclaim authority became increasingly futile, and their reputation suffered as the community began to view them as overreaching and incompetent. I had not only won my property back, I had reshaped the power dynamics of the entire neighborhood in a way that would leave a lasting impression for years to come. Even late at night, as I sat in the hotel's rooftop lounge overlooking the sparkling city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The mix of anger, disbelief, and frustration I had felt upon returning from vacation had been transformed into exhilaration, pride, and strategic brilliance. I realized that the key to my victory had been patience, intelligence, and a willingness to see opportunity in the midst of adversity. The hotel was more than a business, it was a statement, a monument to what happens when determination meets circumstance. The HOA had thought they could manipulate me, but in trying to do so, they had handed me a treasure far beyond their imagining. Finally, I smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. The hotel was mine, the legacy of my triumph was cemented, and the power to shape my future, and, indirectly, the community around me, rested firmly in my hands. I had turned a shocking violation into a story of audacity, strategy, and ultimate victory. As the moon rose and cast a silver glow over the property, I felt an unshakable certainty: no one would ever question my authority again, and the hotel, built on what was once my stolen land, would forever stand as proof that boldness, intelligence, and a refusal to be undermined could turn even the most audacious theft into an extraordinary fortune.